Okay, so this session is about uh it's about uh what? The brain. Yay. So the brain is like so central to the menopause experience. It's not just about brain protection in the long run, but that's what most of the kind of tools that I'll give you are based around protecting the brain in the long term. Um, but they will also, many of them will also be addressing brain related symptoms. And there is more and more research into the brain in menopause and how really it is a not just a change in, we know this from symptoms, that it's not just a change in ovarian function, though that is what creates difference in the amount of estrogen and progesterone that's being produced in that radical way. But it has a huge and intimate relationship with the brain. The ovaries have a huge and intimate relationship with the brain, and estrogen has, and namely estradiol, which is the primary type of estrogen produced by the ovaries, has an intimate relationship with the brain, which you'll see in the slideshow in a minute. And people who are born with ovaries are hardwired for their brains to respond to estrogen. So there are cells in the brain with estrogen receptors. And estrogen actually literally physiologically goes to the brain and talks to the cells. We were talking live earlier before I recorded about the possibility of men having a journey not unlike menopause. And there is a term, andropause, which refers to the reduction of testosterone really in men. And men's brains have a similarly connective relationship with testosterone as women's brains have with estrogen or estrogen. But the difference is that for men, testosterone tends to dwindle much more gently and for a longer time, so that the brain and body has time to get used to it. And really, a man's fertility, as we know, lasts often until their 70s and sometimes later. And that's when we see the truer effects of andropause. So while men do have a change to their fertility that affects their levels of testosterone, it is neither as quick nor as early, and therefore is usually not as noticeable for men, and is probably therefore wrapped up quite recognizably in aging, where menopause for women can happen at any age, while on average it happens when we are in our 40s or early 50s, even mid 50s for some women. It can naturally, without any adverse issue in the body, occur much earlier. And even if it is in our 40s, we don't tend to associate that nowadays anyway with aging. Whereas actually, you know, we're aging all the time. But I think that's where we can get a bit overwrought about menopause when we um, don't allow ourselves to recognize that there is also aging occurring at the same time. So yeah, I think that's it before the slideshow. Just this deep, hardwired connection between the brain and estrogen, particularly estradiol, and the ovaries, therefore. So I'm just going to share the screen and do a little presentation for you. Those of you who are watching the recording, you're always welcome to email me with questions that come up as I go through the recording. So unless somebody who's here live tells me otherwise, I'm going to assume everyone can see the screen. It makes sense to me that you can. And I think you will see quite quickly, quite readily, why the subtitle here is Feed, Stress and Rest. And the stress part is both positive and negative, but my intention here for it is to be positive. But what you'll see is that actually the food for the brain is both what we think of as food, nutrition, but also that stress feeds the brain as well. So the reason I have this image at the beginning of the brain can bounce back is that some of the brain information is scary. And I think it's very important to recognize that the most in-depth research that we're seeing into the female menopausal brain really does point to it not being the end of the world, even though there are some scary changes, and that the brain is able to recalibrate. So just keep that in mind as we go through the stuff that may seem kind of spooky. So estrogen or estrogen is involved in many of the functions, most of the functions of our brain. So it helps, for example, cells of our brain to manage the effects of aging and oxidative stress, which is what I mean when I say resilience there. It's sort of keeping the cells strong and able to manage the influx of stressors upon them. Obviously, we need proliferation and growth of cells, otherwise they're not going to be able to do their job, and we need them to repair when they're damaged. So estrogen or estrogen does that. You've all heard of neuroplasticity, which is the ability for us to learn new things, for our neurons to some die and others revive, or new ones to grow so that we can learn new habits. And that's really important on so many levels. It's really important for mental health, particularly, to be able to rewire the brain from unhelpful thoughts, and also to help us learn new things. So estrogen helps with that. Now, it's not that our brains are no longer plastic when we are postmenopausal, but not by a long chalk. We can absolutely create new pathways and revive neurons. It just might mean that we need to focus on it a bit more. And that's exactly it, isn't it, about postmenopausal care? Everything does still respond as it did when we were in our 20s and 30s, but it just responds to, it needs a bit more to respond to. So we can't take stuff for granted, I guess. We all have this strong awareness of feeling exhausted in menopause, particularly neurologically exhausted, where we feel that kind of heavy brain fatigue. And part of that may be because estrogen helps the use of the glucose that is the fuel of the brain. And remember that it's glucose that is the brain's primary fuel source. And that's why we have to keep our blood sugar level, especially avoiding blood sugar drops. So neurotransmitters are chemicals that bring information across the neural system, the brain and the nervous system, and that's partly supported by estrogen or estradiol in particular. So obviously, you can imagine if those communication channels are not functioning very well, that could contribute to symptoms. And also, I think it's very important, and this is relating to mood as well, and neuroplasticity, and even stress, that when the limbic system, for example, which is the system which helps us figure out what is worth worrying about and what is insignificant, if those neural signals are not balanced, then we get this circumstance which many of us will notice, where the slings and arrows of life become more impactful. So we might be able to, sorry for the graphic example, see a squashed cat on the road when we're in our 30s and turn a blind eye and not worry so much about it. And maybe then in menopause, we see the squashed cat and a whole story develops and we get much more negatively affected by it. Obviously, there are things that deserve our horror and deserve our joy, but sometimes things get a bit dysregulated and we start to see as significant stuff that may not need to be taken in so much, taken to heart so much. So you probably heard me talk about estrogen as being like a buffer for the effects of stress on the brain. And that's both the immediate effects of stress, in terms of just getting overwrought and anxious and all those other stress effects, but also the long-term stress effects, which would be things like, um, you know, uh, where the brain would be physiologically negatively affected by long-term stress. And then that's also related to the circulation piece. So stress and poor circulation and cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure can all lead to inflammatory states, which can lead to oxidative stress. And then, we're on a poor trajectory in terms of long-term health. So I really wanted, before I go on, though, to give you this you can photograph it and read it. It's from the more recent book by Lisa Mosconi, which I'm not enjoying as much as her first book is called the XX. Actually, I think it's her second book was called the XX Brain, XX referring to the two female chromosomes. And this one is called the Menopause Brain. What I'm not enjoying about the Menopause Brain is that it is a little watered down or something. It's quite, it's a bit of an overall menopause self-care book where I'm a bit more interested in the nitty-gritty. Now, it does have some of the nitty-gritty, but and of course, she's done more research since she wrote the XX Brain. But I found the XX Brain to be more compelling. But if you want a more user-friendly book, then the Menopause Brain is quite helpful. Now, she's obviously taking, I don't know if she's had a contributor to her sections of the book, which are about exercise and diet and stuff, because I know that she's written a book about brain food, but I don't know how much she really knows in herself about exercise, etc. But it seems to be a fairly sound gathering of information. But there's pieces in this this quote that I want you to really notice. There are hints and glimmers that this reshaping may include adaptations that help compensate for and maintain brain function, and that the brain has its ways of carrying on. That lines of evidence indicate that women's brains have the remarkable, much underestimated, and I really like this, yet to be celebrated ability to adapt to menopause. So it may be that if I gave you this talk in 5 years' time, there would be much more celebration about what we discover about the female brain. For now, this is where we're at. The information I give you is where we're at. But please remember this. So I believe that now still, and certainly this was the case the last time I looked, that statistically the most feared disease of later life is Alzheimer's dementia. And so really remembering that it is one of the most preventable diseases by lifestyle choices. So living a life with quite easy tweaks. Well, are they easy or not? Who knows? Because, for instance, community is one, and if you live alone, then and you find you have social anxiety, then maybe that's not so easy. But this little image is referring, the reason I put the little angel there is because the nun study I'm referring to, the NUN study of nuns, where in that study, it's a very, very long study. I think I've quoted it before in this group possibly, but it is worth talking about again because it is specifically about brain health. For decades, the researchers followed in a community of Catholic sisters, nuns, and they interviewed them about their past, and they interviewed them regularly as they grew older. And then when any of them died, they had, as part of the research, donated their brains to be studied. And they interviewed them and did checklists regarding signs of dementia. And it was discovered upon dissecting the donors' brains that many of them who did not have any symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's had the physiological changes of Alzheimer's and dementia, so that it is possible to live with the physiological changes that we see can begin in menopause and be symptom free. So this is incredibly important, that external factors and lifestyle can be the difference between having a brain that is aging in the way that brains age and being compos mentis, and having a brain that is aging in the way that brains age and not being compos mentis. So one of the things these images are about is the two girls at the bottom left there who are like investigating the plant and taking notes. This was about they studied the history of these women, and those who didn't show any Alzheimer's symptoms were the ones that were more likely to have inquiring minds and a depth of language and an ability to kind of think about things and look around and in and out and ask questions about things. There's also in the top left there, we know that people who maintain learning, they keep learning, are less likely to encounter Alzheimer's. The really sad thing is that if you've been educated in your youth, you're less likely to develop Alzheimer's. So there's quite a heavy demographic bias in terms of Alzheimer's, where people who are in more deprived societies or demographics, undereducated or just averagely or poorly educated, may be more likely to develop Alzheimer's, unfortunately. Really awful thing. What they didn't talk about in the study is community and sense of purpose. So at the bottom right there, the image of the grandmother plaiting the girl's hair is, I mean, it could be anything. It could have had an image of a woman who mows her neighbor's lawn every week, or someone who in the nun study, for instance, they talk about the fact that the women in the convent all had a job. They had something that was their task to do. It might have been the garden, it might have been the kitchen, etc. So there was a sense of purpose. And then the spiritual connection piece, spiritual fitness, is not necessarily religious. It's about having a sense of otherness, a sense of community, a sense of self-forgiveness, a sense of equality with others. So you can look up spiritual fitness on the internet, and there's a beautiful list of things that it refers to. And I talk about it in my upcoming book, which by the time some of you see this recording will not be upcoming anymore. It'll be actually winging its way around the world. And then the other thing that they didn't talk about in the nun study is learning new physical things, but we know that that is positive for brain health. And they also didn't talk about what I think is really key, is the likelihood that these sisters were not as stressed as people who live in the running around like a blue-arsed fly world, working, minding children, minding aging parents, earning a living, worrying about bills. Things are potentially simpler. Obviously, we all have our emotional life, and stresses of living in community are there, but the multiplicity, I suspect, of stressors was less in these communities. So here are the main things outside of the nun study, and some of it is within the nun study. And I always hate, as I think you probably know, putting pictures of sleep. Get more sleep. It's one of the most difficult things for us to achieve in perimenopause, and there are certainly many things that you can do to support your sleep that would be immensely important for the brain. And I kind of don't want to overstate it, and yet we can't overstate it. So yeah, plenty of nuance there, of course. Exercise in general is very good, and we'll be doing some mental exercises more than physical today, or to go with this presentation, but also particularly uh, exercise that involves learning new things, or it doesn't have to be exercise per se. So I've got a picture deliberately of a couple there doing a dance that has steps to it rather than free form dancing. So there is a lot of research into dance as being a very helpful tool for reducing Alzheimer's risk. And in some of the studies, they'll point to the learning new things, but in some it just talks about dance in general. So dancing would be top of the list, I would say. The image of the people chatting there is about, I put that up there to refer to treating depression. So, but it also obviously crosses over into the community and being with other people. And depression treatment might also be taking medications. It might not just be talk therapy or CBT. Certainly, depression medications would be a very good idea for clinical depression, because depression can increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's, unfortunately. Then just below the sleeping person, you've got a girl with her hearing aid. It was just the clearest image of a hearing aid. I would have liked, well, other ones were like terribly frail ancient people, which we will all become ancient people, but they were sort of a little patronizing. So treating hearing loss, because hearing loss is associated with a higher risk of Alzheimer's. So really important to treat it, i.e. use hearing aids, which does reduce that risk again. We've got that fella learning stuff. Already talked about that on the last slide. Food, incredibly important, not only to nourish yourself with lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. Mediterranean diet is particularly associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's, which means lots of lean protein, fruit and vegetables, complex carbohydrates, a glass of wine every now and then, a dessert every now and then, community, company, but also looking after blood sugar balancing is immensely important. We'll talk about that in a minute. And indeed, it has been already there in some other presentations. The group of people there putting stuff in the boxes is again about this sense of purpose. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's volunteering, and that's also obviously in that circumstance offering community, which is very important. The picture of the meditator is referring to looking after stress and blood pressure. Meditation obviously seems to have quite a good, what's the word? What's the word when something's got a good reputation? Maybe it's just reputation. Good bit of study that it helps with stress. And then obviously the women there at the bottom is about community. Things like smoking and alcohol can be are related to increased risk also of Alzheimer's dementia. So this is a slide from one of the other presentations, so I'm hoping it's familiar to you, and I want that for you, that you start to connect those dots so it doesn't all feel like there's different things to do for each different area. And it's not just about food for blood sugar, it's movement, rest, and stress regulation as well. But remembering that the food is about 50% vegetables and some fruit. Sometimes you see tables which would bring it in sort of 30% veg and 20% fruit. I'd go maybe a little more veg and a little less fruit. 25% lean protein, 25% complex carbohydrates, i.e. your whole grains. Your good fats, really important, either have some oily fish with your meal or add some good fats in the way of nuts, seeds, olive oil. And then obviously drinking is very important. Drinking water is very important. Nutrition in general, a backbone of hydration, that even 2% of hydration can really exacerbate brain fog. So I would say that your first port of call if you're struggling with brain fog would be to check your hydration. Drink water, drink herbal teas, then drink some more water and some more herbal teas. A great trick I find for my hydration is that I've gotten into the absolute religious habit of having a full, I'd say it's probably 3/4 of a pint, 750, I don't know, milliliters in pints. Anyway, a big glass of water, and I put it by my bed when I go to bed. And I drink all of it before I even let myself get out of bed, because I'm not a great water drinker. I do forget. So you will be dehydrated when you wake because your kidneys never stop working even when you're asleep. So rehydrating first thing you wake up is immensely important. The second thing I would say to look after if you're struggling with brain fog is, are you getting enough omega-3? Now that is underneath there, it's written EPA, DHA. Those are the byproducts of omega-3, and that's actually what we're looking for. And it is most available in oily fish. So if you do not eat oily fish, if you're a vegetarian, it is harder. Well, you might not like oily fish, or you might be a vegetarian. It is harder to get your EPA and DHA requirements. You can get it from avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, flax seeds, as flax oil as well. Lots of different oils. Olive oil is the queen of them, but you have to do the breaking down of the omega-3 from any other source other than fish. You have to break down oily fish. You have to break down the omega-3, so you're getting less for your buck or less for your quantity of food. So though I am not in a position to make supplement recommendations in a group setting like this, and I'm also limited in terms of the supplements that I am allowed to recommend to people, omega-3 is one that is worth talking to your healthcare provider about, or to your, I'm thinking you could talk to your GP or your physician about it. They may not know. Most physicians and GPs are not trained in nutrition, and they are pretty ignorant about it. And they'll go with just some sheet of paper they've been given about what the amount you should have every day is. And it may be below optimal for brain health in postmenopause. So you could see if there's somebody very informed in your local health food store, or have a session with a functional medicine practitioner or a nutritional therapist, depending on where you are in the world. They'll have different names. I think it's one of the supplements that is most worth spending your money on. But that is my personal opinion, and it is also not my personal opinion, my educated opinion, but it's not a piece of advice. But it is also very important, if you're on any medications or you have any health conditions, that you check with your doctor whether it is safe for you to take X, Y, or Z supplement, which can be much more powerful in reaction to particular medications or particular illnesses than you might expect. If you are vegan or vegetarian, you can get EPA, DHA from kelp supplements, but they are expensive. Antioxidants, I earlier talked about how estrogen or estrogen can help with the resilience of our cells. So our cells can struggle with what's called oxidative stress, which just happens as we age. We get more free radicals, which stress our tissues, and oxidative stress is a bit like rusting. Things get rusty, and antioxidants do the opposite of that. So once our balance of antioxidants is higher than free radicals, we're healthier and healthier, and we're living, we're likely to live longer. Won't look as old in our skin, etc. We eventually, free radicals will win because we all have to die. But if we want to feel well while we're alive, get those antioxidants in there, which are in abundance in fruits, vegetables, particularly deeply colored foods. Berries would be kind of one of the chief goodies for the brain, but also something like purple cabbage would be really good. Anything that's got a high level of pigment, particularly purple pigments. Vitamin C is very important for the brain. We all know where to get that. B vitamins would be quite important for your current feelings, your current energy in your brain, mood, cognition, energy. So if you're not on B vitamin supplements, and particularly if you're a vegetarian, or if you're having really heavy bleeds, etc., it is really worthwhile in peri and postmenopause getting your B vitamins checked. And if you're not eating a B vitamin rich diet, increase those vitamins. You can easily just Google what's high in B vitamins. It's not worth me going into it here. And if you are eating lots of those foods and you still are low on B vitamins, then you might be wise to supplement. So You'll see from our session, we'll do a few of these, a session that's going to be twinned with this recording. We won't be doing all of them or everything, but Kirtan Kriya we're definitely going to do. And that is one of the very few single practices that has good research for a specific concern. And it is a meditation with a mudra and a chanting. And it has been researched in relation to Alzheimer's and being quite helpful for the reduction of the progress of Alzheimer's in people who have just started to experience Alzheimer's. So it's very well worth learning and then making a habit of it. And you could do it for 6 minutes or 12 minutes. And if you could start doing that every morning as a, wake yourself up 15 minutes earlier and start your day with Kirtan Kriya, you might find that it really helps your brain fog, and it will certainly be good for your long-term brain health. We'll do some eye exercises. When we exercise the eyes, the brain has to work quite hard. Different regions work with different eye exercises. I won't be going into what regions are working, just suffice to say that when we exercise the eyes, the brain has to work hard in a variety of reasons and regions, and that's what we're trying to do, is get the brain to sit up and work, much like any other muscle, any muscle in the body. In the body, the brain needs exercise. Balance challenges obviously are good for balance, but they're also good for the brain because the brain's going to have to work for class. Learning new sequences within yoga will help anyway, but I also would tend to teach sequences that then I get the students to remember. Again, I'm not going to do that today. I think I might have put it in another class, but I'm not, can't remember. I'll try and remember to record such a thing on my next Tuesday class and put it into the bank of classes here, if my brain fog will let me remember. Non-dominant limb challenges, we are going to do that today. So it's about, again, waking up the brain through using the hands that, or the leg that you don't use as often to do things that you normally do on the first limb, on the dominant limb. Meditation, obviously, I've already mentioned, good for stress, and we're going to use our Kirtan Kriya as our meditation today. And vagus nerve stimulus, and just ask yourself why for a moment. Maybe the thought comes up as to why vagus nerve. It's because the vagus nerve is the nerve responsible for our rest and restore nervous system response. And we've talked about the effects of stress on the brain and on the symptoms many times. And if we can help ourselves go into that parasympathetic response, then we are protecting the brain as well. And we are going to be reducing symptoms, brain-related symptoms and other symptoms too. In terms of all of that stuff around Alzheimer's and dementia prevention, just remember that whatever you do for your healthcare is going to help your symptoms. Whatever you do for your symptoms is going to help your health. So a tensegrity is a structure that holds itself in tension and integrity. So it is a self-sustaining structure, i.e. your body, including your brain. And when one part moves, everything else responds. So a tensegrity is any structure which, when one part moves, everything else just has to make a little shift to move with it. And a biotensegrity is a biological structure, i.e. your body. So when you work to support your brain, there are ways in which that is supporting your heart. There are ways in which that is supporting your muscles. There are ways in which that is supporting your bones. When you work on health, there are ways in which that is supporting your symptoms and vice versa. So none of what we're doing is useless for anything, really. In all of these presentations, I've kept saying it may seem overwhelming because there's so many areas to look after, but they all interrelate. And it always boils down to some pretty simple things, which is really the 4 or 5 or 6 pillars of health as you see them. So movement that we love, nutrition, rest and sleep, oh my God, what's the fourth one? Stress, minding stress, community, maybe spiritual fitness. Those there's often more pillars of health mentioned. But in particular, when we're looking after brain health, we're hopefully reducing some of the brain related um, symptoms. And I put hot flushes in there because, yes, it's a brain related symptom, but you can imagine that it wouldn't be quite the same as something like brain fog or fatigue. And it's not the brain stimulus that's going to help with hot flushes, where that will help with brain fog and fatigue, maybe even with sleep disturbance, because you kind of get the brain awake at the right times of day. So we don't want to do this kind of work right before bed, by the way, any brain training. But hot flushes will be positively affected by our support of stress on behalf of our brain. So just wanting to bring it all down to something manageable, you might want to take a little photograph of that. You could even print out that photograph and stick it on your fridge or whatever. So avoiding insulin resistance means blood sugar balancing. And we do that through regular balanced nutrition. And we nourish both in terms of food, but also in terms of effort. But the nourishment needs to be plentiful because the brain can't store energy the way muscles store energy as fat. The brain can't store glucose. It needs a constant drip feed. So when we starve ourselves or undernourish, the brain is stressed and doesn't have enough fuel. So eating is incredibly important, as of course is hydration. Avoiding inflammation so that we're avoiding damage to the brain, and that's through sleep, rest, and managing our stress, and also potentially eating antioxidant foods. And then activating is part of our nourishment, and that's the physical things. So we're activating neurons, and then spiritual fitness does seem to be a part of it. So psychological care, I think, is something not to forget in relation to brain health. And these are the talks that have in this resource, in these recordings, that would have the most help, the most crossover help for you for regarding brain health. So that is the end of that little presentation. As I said, email me with any questions, and then there will be a recording twinned with this further down, and I will label it. I can't remember what number it'll be just at the moment. I think 33 or something. That'll be there for you to dive into. And my intention in that recording is to do it in little pockets of stuff. I'll bring it a bit into a practice, but the idea is that there's going to be snacks for you to take away to look after your old brain.